Hello, and welcome to Technically Creative, a series of conversations with Georgia Tech alumni who have intertwined their passions with their degrees to chart exciting career paths in the creative world. My name is Aaron Shackelford. I'm the director of Georgia Tech Arts. And today we are joined by Michael Boatright. Michael's a 1982 Tech graduate who received his bachelor's in information and computer science. And he went on to work for IBM and other companies as a leading experimenter in digital multimedia storytelling. And today, Michael continues his passion for photography with his own studio here in the Atlanta area. Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining us for a conversation about your work and your career and your time at Tech.
Good morning, Aaron, and good morning, Georgia Tech.
So I want to start with today, and then we'll work our way backwards to the beginning of your career. But can you just talk a little bit about Michael Boatright Photography, your studio, and why you decided to open a photography studio back in 2014?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. Actually, the truth is originally I had a studio at home, but we have cats, and cats like to chew paper, and horizontal things is very attractive. And so I ended up having too much fur in my work. And so I ended up getting a studio. That's the truth. It was also a good place to work. It's nice to be able to separate yourself from what's going on in the world and actually focus on what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
So you have a lifelong passion for photography. So in some ways, this was just a changing of a location of where you're doing this work. And I'm curious, just to start off, can you say a little bit about, like, literally your entire life you've been involved in photography?
Well, my dad taught me photography when I was at age 12. Dad was a professional photographer at one point. He was a journalist went to the University of Oklahoma. Used to photograph Oklahoma football games from the sidelines with these big, heavy, the kind of cameras that you would see in the old 50s movies and TV shows. And he had that camera since he was 14, so he had the same passion I did. And we used to spend hours together in the darkroom. I came from a family of artists. My aunt actually could authenticate a Dutch master's painting in her day. She studied at the Sorbonne. My mom was a painter. My sister is a working artist in Ohio. And my other sister teaches second grade, or I think it's second grade now. And her art is just, what second graders do. It's probably the purest form of art there is. So, yeah, it's been a passion of mine most of my life. I've had a camera in my hands most of my life.
So talk to me then about the connection between, artistic family, photographer for your entire life, and yet you come to a place like Georgia Tech to do information computer science. Can you help me bridge that gap?
Oh, well, that's funny. First of all, Dad and I were not artists. We were photographers. We made that distinction clear. I used to say I couldn't draw a straight line straighter than a dog's hind leg. But the truth was, when I was a kid, I also wanted, like a lot of kids, to be an astronaut. So I would draw pictures of rockets and things, and I was very involved in science. And when I was about 13, I think I was 13 or 14 years old, I did a project where I built a computer, a small little analog computer. And it got me interested in computers. It was just fascinating. And I was always fascinated by math. And computers and math were pretty much hand in hand back then. I mean, nowadays, you still have to study a lot of math to really understand, particularly the engineering behind computers. But there's also, at the same time, a lot of creativity in making things happen. There was a time when I would write a computer program and I would get a catharsis from writing that computer program. It was just exciting. It was just creative and clever and new. But over time, that kind of, as I guess more and more in the computer science became more and more taken for granted, you were no longer in the nuts and bolts that you really could control stuff. I started really kind of shifting from, more of a left brain to a right brain kind of thing. Funny, when I was if you asked my any of my members of my graduating class or my fraternity, that I'd be doing creative art for a living today, they'd laugh, because when we were in school, the last thing in the world you wanted to do was to take a liberal arts class. I actually studied French in high school, so I clept out of a year of French and got 9 hours credit for clepping out of French. And boy, do I rue that today, because boy, I wish I had taken some of those, and there's a part of me that hopes that when all this mess with the COVID and everything straightens out, I've actually considered it when I turned 62 to possibly work on a degree at the LMC school. Tech has shifted sort of like I have,
Yeah. So was there a moment where you felt like, I'm putting this creative aspect of myself aside for my career plans, or did it just something that evolved as you said, you started following computer science and the field itself was moving away from a more creative-minded approach?
I'd say it evolved. I'm not sure I ever had any great epiphany. It was more like, the educational variety, so to speak, as the theologian William James kind of described it. When I was in IBM in the late 90s, I happened to be located. My floor was the same floor where the folks that invented the very first IBM audio capture card, audio playback and capture card. So I got to know the multimedia folks. Kind of got a little bit more involved in multimedia. We had the first video capture card, and we used to run around with a video camera, and we would take pictures with the video camera, build some software, and would put them together for slideshows for things like corporate meetings and stuff like that. And that was a blast. I mean, it was just a lot of fun. And then from that, I got into the Olympics, and I was with the broadcast TV organization in the Atlanta Olympic Committee. And, that was, just broadcast media is just so cool. I mean, it's just a blast. I love the guys that are behind the scenes here putting it together, because to me, there's kind of the technical problem solving, and yet there's also the creative, beauty and expressing feelings, and to be able to take the beauty of a sunset or a dance or even the theaters, which I'm doing right now, and reflecting that feeling back to others and be able to use technique to accomplish that. That's kind of using both sides of the brain, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. So there's a lot you just said that I want to explore. And I guess the first part is, again, thinking about the way in which you blend that left and right brain approach to the work. What's your advice, or how did you kind of train yourself in that left and right brain as your career started, moving forward? You started engaging with all these multimedia components.
It's interesting. I'm not sure I ever trained myself, other than I consider myself a lifelong learner. I never stop learning. One of my favorite quotes is from Michelangelo, where he said, "I'm still learning." I love to discover. I love the feeling, the sense of discovery. I love understanding, why does this work this way? So, to me, why does the camera work this way? Why does the human eye see differently what the camera sees? And how can I work between the two to make something to express how I feel? There's a saying in photography that photography is creative problem solving. And I love problem solving. That's just my brain's always been that way. Probably my DNA.
Yeah. So as
Georgia
originally
Tech.
Working. Yeah, I mean, you've captured very well. Like, that is the tech mantra. So I'm curious for some of your, as a photographer or working in digital media. I mean, is the problem for you here's what I see here, how can I best convey that to my audience? Or is it something of, you have a sense in your head, knowing the technology, here's the sort of experience we can create for our audience?
Well, one of the funniest, one of the craziest questions I get asked frequently is, did you Photoshop that? and Photoshop is not a verb. But when I'm in the field shooting, if I've got my camera in front of me and I've got a scene in front of me, I'm already in my mind thinking about the process that I'm going to go through and what is the end target. If I'm shooting something and the only reason I'm shooting it is to broadcast it live over, say, this HD video like this. It's a whole different process to think about than if I want it to be a large billboard, for example, or a 5x7 print, which I've done before. I made a photograph of the Rio Grande in outside Taos, Mexico, stitched together in Photoshop. Took Photoshop 2.5 hours to stitch it together because it was 61 photographs I took standing on a moving bridge. But I'll tell you what, the 5x7 print is stunning. You know, I mean, it was just, and I saw that in my mind when I saw the scene in front of me. So I see the process. Now, do I tweak things as I go? Absolutely. Sometimes I'll discover that there was something in there that I didn't even realize, and that takes me in a whole different direction. And that's probably part of the joy of discovery in the technology.
So I'm curious because, again, like, we're really fascinated in these ways in which Georgia Tech, information computer science kids go into these fields. So, what you just described, where you see it in your head and then try to create it. I mean, it sounds like that's how you would create a program when you were working in computer science as well, right? Like, you have this idea of where you want to get to, and then figuring out the best tools to assemble that project.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, today I don't write near as much code as I used to. I still write a little PHP for my website, but quite honestly, the technology for the whole mindset about how programming itself has changed. You have to understand that when I first started, when I was at the engineering experiment station, we actually still had a machine that you could actually key in the instructions, one instruction at a time, machine level instructions. And that was very cool, but you can't do that anymore. When I was at Tech, part of my training on campus, I basically, when I graduated, knew down to the electrons behaving with each other in the physics of a NAND gate to the advanced programming languages and how a line was drawn on a graphics screen. I knew the whole from soup to nuts. And within a year after leaving Tech, so much had changed in the industry that I just start taking for granted. And today my iPhone has more power than all the computers on the Tech campus when I was in school. I mean, just in my iPhone, there's more computing power than there was back then. So, it changes, it evolves.
Yeah. Do you have, I know you have grandkids. Do you have advice for a student who might think about going into a field similar to yours today? What sort of career path or educational path would you recommend for somebody who's interested in a career like yours?
Wow, that's kind of a tough question, because if I were to do it over again, I wouldn't change a thing. But I would say that probably as good of an education that I had from Georgia Tech, I also had a good education from the School of Hard Knocks. I mean, you have to be willing to make mistakes. I think that's probably one of the things I have learned more. And I'm also a ham radio operator, and I was cleaning out my ham shack a couple of months ago, and there are these boxes of projects that didn't work, right? And I learned more from those than I ever learned from my successes. And I think that's probably one of the things that I would say to somebody just new to coming into Tech is be willing to make mistakes and keep learning from them. Never stop learning.
Yeah. And I say, as somebody who enjoys film photography as a hobby for myself, one of the things you learn quickly is that there's more failed shots than there are successful shots.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like you learn that.
One thing to have a look on the back, oh, did that work? Oh, did that work? Did that work? Did that work? No, you got to wait a couple of days at best, unless you develop them in your darkroom yourself that afternoon. You've got to really kind of work harder and be smarter when you're doing film. So, you have to just keep willing. I mean, it's just it's a process. It's all a process.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Dark House project a few minutes ago, and I want to touch on that because it is sort of one of your reactions to today's situation that we're in. So can you describe a little bit about it and what brought about this concept?
Well, so Dark Houses as a project actually came to me just less than a month ago at the beginning of July, and I've spent the month of July working on photographing the dark stages of Atlanta. Personally, I have been involved in the theater since I was a kid. My mom acted in a local theater, regional theater. My whole life has been spent in and out and involved with the theater. To my chagrin, I only went to a few performances of Drama Tech when I was on campus, which is Georgia Tech's theater group. But I had been doing some dance photography work back in the early part of the last decade, and got connected. Was photographing a dancer who was performing a summer program in the Black Box at Drama Tech, and I ran into one of the students was there, and we got to talking, and he invited me to come photograph their open house for incoming freshmen. And I've been photographing Drama Tech since. I've now done 37 programs with them. And by the way, they keep me young. And just working with those students, I mean, I'd hire any one of them in a heartbeat. So, and the future's in good hands. If the Drama Tech students are any representation of Georgia Tech students at large. So when the COVID-19 hit, I had some friends who were doing different projects involved with trying to take their photography and applying it in the specific situations. Several of them were in like small towns. In May, I did some photographs for just for free, just to keep my hands busy, because it's funny when you have a skill and you don't use it for a few weeks, you forget how to do it. Even muscle memory starts to wane. So I did some porch portraits of some of my neighbors, and that kept me busy and active for a while. But it was not the thing. It wasn't my thing. I mean, my thing is to do portraits of people. I love working with other people, collaborating on creating works of art. But that was just not the thing. And it hit me one day. I was actually meditating here in my studio, and it hit me that I needed to go do this. And it was clear as a bell. And, if you look on the website that we put together for it, it actually, that mission statement, that synopsis of the project hasn't changed much since I first started shooting. I was actually a little worried at first that some of the stages might think in a negative view of having their, hey, look, we're not working, and well, it's not that they don't want to be working. In fact, often they would be a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of weeks away from actually running a show. In the spring, most is usually, the last or the next to last big production for a lot of theaters. And rather than being a negative, they were to a theater almost. I ran into a little bit, mostly from commercial venues, the big concert venues. But the theaters in town have been overwhelmingly enthusiastic because they know that they're struggling. I mean, they actually are okay right now, most, although they can all use support. Who's not okay are the actors and the stage hands, the people that pull the curtains and rig the lights and paint the scenery, and the craftspeople, the makeup artists, the people that serve the concessions out in the lobby. They aren't working, and here next at the end of this week, their unemployment pretty much runs out. Certainly the thing that's been keeping them going runs out. So the whole entertainment industry, and it turns out one of the things that I've been involved with a couple of the theaters, Drama Tech and Theatrical Outfit, a little bit with the Rialto. I've found out that a lot of the theaters have very strong subscriber bases, which means the people who were going into putting those shows together there's a lot of people impacted by this. It's not just these aren't considered essential workers, but yet our culture is just as essential as everything else. And if we let our culture go, we're going to be in trouble. We can't forget.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there is a whole ecosystem of cultural workers and creators that are, in really dire straits at the moment, in Atlanta and across the country and the world. And I found, as somebody who works in theater, I found the project so fascinating because we are all used to seeing those ghost lights on stage at the end of a long day. In some ways, it's a nice thing to see. But it's clearly representing this real emptiness and loss that's happening across our city right now.
That's absolutely right. I mean, it is so true. And the funny thing is, most people never get to see the ghost light. They have no idea. All they ever see is the finished production. And it was actually kind of cool because a couple of the theaters were actually in the middle of putting together the construction. So their stage was a wreck. And I was like, oh, what are they going to think about it when I come in? They were like, well, this is how the sausage is made. This is how the sausage in theater is made. And one of the theaters actually brings their patrons in during production, which is very cool. And so this is kind of a way, I think, of showing people that, hey, this isn't just the glitz and glitter. There's a lot that goes in behind the scenes to make this work.
Yeah, it's true, and it's as I appreciate you making the series because it is such a vivid reminder of what we're facing in the immediate future. One of the questions we've had come in is asking about what's the most rewarding project you've worked on, and that's a big term, so I'll let you sort of interpret that however you like. But looking at your career, I know this might be asking choose your favorite child, but or what is one of the most rewarding?
Well, yeah, rewarding has a lot of different levels. I mean, what I'm working on probably right now is probably the most rewarding right now. But if I look back over my career, I'd have to say it was probably the 4.5 years I spent with the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games, working on the Atlanta Olympics. I spent 9 months of that working on the results system, scoring system for short track speed skating. I actually met Tanya Harding, which was not as cool as meeting Nancy Kerrigan. Nancy was very cool. I actually spent 15 minutes with her while she had a cheeseburger in Lillehammer. And was there the night of the ladies technical program in the Winter Olympics. I worked on short track. My buddy Zoltan Hovarth worked on the figure skating, and the two of us kind of had to run figure skating because it was so big. But then the whole thing, culminated with the two weeks of the Atlantic Olympic Games, and there were incredible highs and incredible lows as well. I was lucky because the technology I used directly helped. It gave the scoring, it gave the backstory, all the information, the live intermediate feeds to the broadcast commentators sitting in the stands. And so I had the honor, I consider it an honor, of sitting 20 feet behind Don Mischer in the control booth in the bowels of what was the TED, the Olympic Stadium, as we did the live broadcast of the opening and closing ceremonies. And that was super cool. That was super. Have all 37 cameras, including the blimp cam, live. I mean, you see the blimp cam, but you don't see it live. We saw it live. I mean, it was going all the time in case they had to cut to it right away. And then when in the midst of that, we had the bombing in Olympic Park. And as the manager of the team, I had been up late the night before working on closing down diving, which went past midnight that night. The bombing, I think, happened 12:30, something like that. I left the building, turned off the radio to just decompress and drove home. Didn't know that the bombing had happened about 12:30 p.m. And so about 5:30 in the morning, one of the guys that worked for me called me up and said, "Hey, I can't get in. They keep shutting down MARTA. I'm supposed to be opening up Equestrian." I said, well, "What's going on?" And he said, "Didn't you hear about the bombing?" And I hadn't. So I grabbed a quick shower, and my wife drove me downtown, and I spent 2 hours trying to get into the Inforum building where we had our operations center. And that afternoon, I saw the ATF agents crawling all over the ground. I mean, it was a profoundly overwhelming experience. So when we got to the closing ceremonies of the games and it was all over and everything was done and they extinguished the torch. And I'll tell you, by the way, I was one of like 5 people that knew Muhammad Ali was going to light the torch. I walked around I got goosebumps right now. Still, and that was 25 years ago, almost 24 years ago. I knew that he was going to light the torch. It was so cool. They closed the put the torch out. I went out in the field. The athletes were still playing. They were just partying at the end. I put a knee on the ground. I said, "Thank you, God. Thanks for the experience, and thanks for it being over." Because it was. I mean, we spent 4.5 years, averaging 60-hour weeks putting that project together. It was huge. And if you saw the party, it was a big deal. We had a party and the world came. So it was cool. That's probably the most exciting thing I ever did. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you enjoy the play, right?
I mean, it's hard to argue with that answer. I got goosebumps as well when you were talking about Muhammad Ali, and I think like everybody, I vividly remember sitting in Indianapolis watching that. So I can't imagine what it was like to be here.
It was pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I had to know because I had to actually make sure that we had his biography loaded into the system 24 hours in advance so we didn't screw up. That's what happens to computer guys, right? They always assume you're going to screw up. So we had to have it loaded ahead of time. I told my wife, I said, I know something really cool, but I can't tell you. I was like that high off the ground for 24 hours knowing it. It was cool.
That's commitment. We only have a minute or two left, but one question we do try to ask everyone is, what's your favorite Georgia Tech tradition that still sticks with you?
I'm going to say 2 because my favorite Georgia Tech tradition is George P. Burdell, bar none. Absolutely, George P. Burdell is a god. He's my hero. And 2 other heroes, 2 deans. George Griffin, who was, I think, perhaps considered the most beloved dean on campus ever. And I actually knew him. He went to my church, and I knew him. He was in his 90s when I knew him. And Dean James Dull, who was my dean when I was on campus, and who the Black Box Theater at Drama Tech is named after. Those are the things that stick in my mind about Georgia Tech the most.
Wow. Well, we're pretty much out of time, and Michael, I want to thank you so much. As you said in an email to me, we probably could spend an hour on each one of these topics that we just touched on.
So.
And maybe one day when we can take away the ghost light, we can invite you over to First, and we can have an even longer conversation about photography and digital media. And it sounds like we've just tip of the iceberg for your Atlanta Olympic stories, I suspect, as well. So
looking forward to it. Excellent. To it.
Well, I also want to thank everybody who's on Facebook today for joining us for today's conversation. I want to invite everybody to mark your calendar for our next conversation, which will be on August 10th, with Annie Eaton, who was a 2010 Tech graduate. She's the founder and executive producer of Amoebis Labs, a gaming software company that will be opening a VR studio in Midtown Atlanta. And a reminder to follow us at Georgia Tech Arts on Facebook for updates and information. And if you're interested in supporting Technically Creative or any of Georgia Tech Arts initiatives, please visit our website for opportunities. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Eric.